When 72-year-old Winifred Ashford arrived at Hollow Creek Stables on a Tuesday morning in October, she had no intention of staying longer than a week. The place was a graveyard of peeling paint and rotted fences, and the only creature left on the property was a coal-black mare named Vesper, a horse so traumatized she hadn't eaten in 9 days. The owner was desperate. The vet had given up. But when Winifred spoke her first words through the stall door, something impossible happened. Vesper's ears flicked forward, and for the first time in over a year, the mare took a step toward a human being. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into Winifred's story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were too old to matter anymore? Like the world had moved on and left you behind? Because that's exactly where Winifred was when she walked into that stable. But what she discovered there, what Vesper showed her, turned everything upside down. So here's my question for you. Do you think animals can sense when someone truly understands their pain? Drop your answer in the comments below, and don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances for people and animals. And subscribe, because stories like this need to be told. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Winifred Ashford had buried her husband, Leonard, on a cold morning in March, and by October she still hadn't figured out how to live without him. Their house in the Virginia countryside felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. His reading glasses on the side table, his boots by the door, his coffee mug she couldn't bring herself to wash. For 47 years, Leonard had been her constant. They'd raised 2 daughters, built a modest life, and grown old together with the kind of quiet grace that doesn't make headlines but fills a heart completely. And then, in the space of 3 months, lung cancer had taken him from robust to frail to gone. The daughters, Pauline and Greta, had tried to help. They'd called every Sunday, sent casseroles, suggested she move closer to one of them. But Winifred couldn't bear the thought of leaving the house where Leonard's presence still lingered in every corner. So she stayed, and she withered. She stopped gardening, stopped baking the sourdough bread Leonard had loved, stopped answering the phone most days. The world became smaller and smaller until it was just her, the house, and the terrible silence. Then, one afternoon in early October, Winifred received a phone call from a woman named Dolores Pritchett. Dolores owned Hollow Creek Stables, a once thriving boarding facility about 20 miles north. Winifred had worked there decades ago, back when she and Leonard were newlyweds, and she'd taken a job mucking stalls to save money for their first home. She'd loved it. The smell of hay, the rhythm of the horses, the simplicity of caring for something that didn't ask complicated questions. Dolores's voice on the phone was strained, almost pleading. "Winifred, I know it's been years, but I'm in a bind. I've got 1 horse left, a mare named Vesper, and she's dying. Won't eat, won't drink, won't let anyone near her. The vet says if she doesn't turn around in the next few days, we'll have to put her down. I've tried everything. I thought, maybe you'd remember how to reach a horse like this." Winifred's first instinct was to say no. She was 72, her knees ached, and she hadn't been around horses in over 30 years. But something in Dolores's voice, something desperate and raw, pierced through the fog of Winifred's grief. "I'll come take a look," Winifred said quietly, "but I'm not promising anything." 2 days later, she drove her old Subaru down the winding dirt road to Hollow Creek. The place was a shadow of what it had been. The main barn sagged under the weight of a leaking roof. Fences hung at odd angles, held together with baling wire and hope. Weeds choked the paddocks. It looked like a place that had given up. Dolores met her at the gate, a thin woman in her 60s with worry lines carved deep around her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, gripping Winifred's hand. "I didn't know who else to call." They walked to the far barn, where Vesper was kept in a dim, isolated stall. Dolores explained as they went. Vesper had been a rescue, seized from a neglect case 2 years prior. She'd been making progress, slowly learning to trust again. But then her previous caretaker, a young woman named Claire, had died unexpectedly in a car accident. Since then, Vesper had spiraled. She'd attacked 2 handlers, refused all food, and spent her days standing in the corner, head low, eyes empty. "She's given up," Dolores said softly, "just like I'm about to." Winifred peered through the bars of the stall. In the shadows stood a black mare, thin as a skeleton, her coat dull and matted. Her ribs showed starkly beneath her skin. But it was her eyes that struck Winifred, dark, bottomless, and filled with a grief so familiar it took her breath away. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror every morning since Leonard died. Winifred didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there, hands resting on the stall door, studying the mare. Vesper didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't lift her head, didn't flick an ear. She simply stood, motionless, like a statue carved from suffering. "Has anyone tried just talking to her?" Winifred asked. Dolores sighed. "We've tried everything, Winifred. Treats, different feed, other horses nearby, calming music. Nothing works. She doesn't want to be here anymore." Winifred nodded slowly. She understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. "Can I go in?" she asked. Dolores hesitated. "She's dangerous, Winifred. She kicked Marcus, my last stable hand, so hard he ended up in the ER. I can't let you—" "I'll be careful," Winifred interrupted gently. "Just let me try." Against her better judgment, Dolores unlocked the stall door. Winifred stepped inside, moving with the slow deliberation of someone who understood that sudden movements shattered fragile things. She didn't approach Vesper directly. Instead, she leaned against the wall opposite the mare and lowered herself carefully onto an overturned feed bucket. For several minutes, she simply sat. The barn was quiet except for the distant coo of mourning doves and the creak of old wood settling. Winifred didn't look directly at Vesper. She'd learned long ago that direct eye contact could feel like a threat to a traumatized animal. Instead, she began to speak. "I lost someone too," Winifred said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name was Leonard. We were married for 47 years, and then one day he was just gone, and I don't know how to be in the world without him." Vesper's ear twitched. It was the smallest movement, but Winifred saw it. "People keep telling me it gets easier," Winifred continued. "That time heals all wounds, but they're wrong, aren't they? Some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who you are." She paused, letting the silence settle again. Then she went on, her voice growing steadier. "I stopped eating too, you know. Not because I wanted to die exactly, just because nothing tasted right anymore. Everything reminded me of him. The coffee I made, the eggs I scrambled, even the air in the house felt different." Vesper shifted her weight. Still didn't turn, but Winifred could sense a change in the quality of the mare's attention. "The thing is," Winifred said, "I don't think anyone can tell you when to start living again. I think you just wake up one morning and realize you're still here. And maybe that means something." She stood slowly, her knees protesting. But instead of approaching Vesper, she moved to the water bucket in the corner and dipped her fingers in, letting the cool liquid drip back into the container. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost musical. "I'm not going to make you do anything," Winifred said, "but I'll be here every day, and when you're ready, I'll be waiting." She left the stall quietly, latching the door behind her. Dolores was standing outside, eyes wide with surprise. "She didn't kick you," Dolores said, almost incredulous. "She didn't," Winifred agreed, "but she listened." Over the next 3 days, Winifred came to the stable every morning. She always did the same thing. Entered Vesper's stall, sat on the overturned bucket, and talked. She talked about Leonard, about the way he'd hum while he fixed things, about his terrible jokes, about the hole he'd left in her life. She talked about her daughters, about the garden she'd abandoned, about the loneliness that followed her like a shadow. And slowly, so slowly, Winifred almost missed it, Vesper began to respond. On the 4th day, the mare turned her head, just slightly, but enough that Winifred could see the full depth of those dark, grieving eyes. On the 5th day, Vesper took 3 steps closer. On the 6th day, when Winifred extended her hand, palm up and empty, Vesper stretched her neck forward and touched her muzzle to Winifred's fingers. The contact lasted less than a second, but it was enough to bring tears to Winifred's eyes. "There you are," Winifred whispered. "There you are." That evening, Dolores reported that Vesper had eaten half a flake of hay, the first food she'd consumed in 11 days. Word spread quickly in the small community around Hollow Creek. The impossible was happening. Winifred Ashford, the quiet widow no one had seen in months, was bringing a dying horse back from the edge. People started stopping by, neighbors, former clients of the stable, even a journalist from the local paper named Fletcher who wanted to write a human interest piece. Winifred hated the attention. She wasn't doing this for recognition or praise. She was doing it because for the first time since Leonard's death, she felt necessary. Vesper needed her. And somewhere in the process of saving this broken horse, Winifred was beginning to find reasons to save herself. But the progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks. One morning, Winifred arrived to find Vesper pacing frantically in her stall, foam flecking her neck, eyes wide with panic. Dolores explained that a thunderstorm had rolled through during the night, and the sound of thunder had triggered something in the mare. Some old trauma neither of them could see, but both could feel. Winifred entered the stall carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones. "It's all right, girl. You're safe. I'm here." But Vesper didn't calm. She wheeled away from Winifred, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. For a moment, Winifred thought the mare might charge. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself small and non-threatening. "Vesper," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the mare's panic. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. Every single day. But running from it doesn't make it go away." The mare froze, sides heaving. Slowly, Winifred lowered herself to the ground, sitting cross-legged in the straw. It was a vulnerable position. If Vesper decided to strike, Winifred would have no way to protect herself. But she'd learned something in these past weeks. Trust required risk. "I could have run too," Winifred said quietly. "After Leonard died, I could have packed up and moved away, started over somewhere new. But I didn't. You know why? Because the pain is the only thing I have left of him, and I'm not ready to let that go yet." Vesper's breathing began to slow. She lowered her head, ears flicking forward and back, as if weighing Winifred's words. "But maybe," Winifred continued, "maybe we don't have to let go completely. Maybe we just learn to carry it differently." She extended her hand again, palm up, fingers relaxed. And after what felt like an eternity, Vesper walked over and rested her muzzle in Winifred's hand. The mare's breath was warm and soft against her skin, and Winifred felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of grief that had lived there for months. "Good girl," Winifred whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Good, brave girl." From that day forward, the bond between woman and horse deepened. Winifred began spending entire afternoons at the stable, not just sitting with Vesper, but grooming her, walking her around the small paddock, reintroducing her to the rhythms of normal life. Vesper's coat began to shine again. She gained weight. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, began to brighten with cautious curiosity. But it was Winifred's voice that remained the key. Vesper would tolerate others now. Dolores could feed her, and a gentle farrier named Nolan could trim her hooves, but she only truly responded to Winifred. When Winifred spoke, Vesper listened. When Winifred called, Vesper came. It was as if the mare had imprinted on the sound of Winifred's grief and recognized it as a mirror of her own. One afternoon, Dolores approached Winifred as she was brushing Vesper's mane. "I need to talk to you about something," Dolores said, her voice heavy. Winifred looked up, a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. "What is it?" Dolores sighed. "I'm selling the property. I can't keep this place going anymore. I've lost too much money, and I'm too old to start over. I've got a buyer lined up, a developer who wants to turn it into housing, but that means—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "What about Vesper?" Winifred asked, her voice tight. "I've been trying to find her a placement, but no one wants a horse with her history. And honestly, I don't think she'd survive another transition. She's bonded to you, Winifred. Without you, I think she'd just give up again." Winifred's mind raced. She couldn't take a horse. She lived in a small house with no land, no facilities. She was 72 years old. It was impossible, but as she looked into Vesper's eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. That night, Winifred sat at her kitchen table staring at the phone. She'd called Pauline and Greta, her daughters, and explained the situation. Their responses had been predictable. "Mom, you can't take in a horse," Pauline had said, her voice edged with frustration. "You don't have the space, the money, or frankly, the energy. You need to focus on yourself right now." Greta had been gentler but no less firm. "We're worried about you, Mom. This sounds like you're trying to fix something that can't be fixed, and we don't want to see you get hurt." Winifred had thanked them and hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Her daughters meant well, but they didn't understand. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about survival, hers and Vesper's. She thought about Leonard, about what he would say if he were here. He'd always been practical, grounded, the one who talked her down from wild ideas. But he'd also been the one who'd encouraged her to take that job at the stable all those years ago, who'd seen how alive she became around horses. "What do I do?" she whispered into the empty kitchen, as if Leonard's ghost might answer. But the house remained silent. The next morning, Winifred drove to Hollow Creek with a plan forming in her mind. She found Dolores in the barn office, sorting through old files and looking defeated. "I want to lease a piece of your land," Winifred said without preamble. Dolores looked up, surprised. "What?" "The back pasture, the one that's fenced off from the main property. It's small, maybe 2 acres, but it's got good grass and that old run-in shed. Lease it to me for a year. I'll pay you monthly rent, and I'll take Vesper." Dolores stared at her. "Winifred, that pasture hasn't been used in 5 years. The shed's half collapsed and the fencing needs work." "I'll fix it," Winifred said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." "And the developer? You said he's buying for housing development, right? He probably won't touch that back section for years. It's too far from the main road and the terrain's too rough. Lease it to me in the meantime. It'll give you some income while I figure out a long-term plan." Dolores leaned back in her chair, studying Winifred with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're serious about this?" "I am. Why?" Winifred hesitated, then answered honestly, "Because I need her as much as she needs me." They shook hands that afternoon. Within a week, Winifred had hired a local handyman named Silas to help repair the shed and reinforce the fencing. She emptied half her savings account, money she'd been hoarding for emergencies, and bought feed, supplements, and basic supplies. Pauline and Greta were horrified when they found out, but Winifred stood firm. "This is my choice," she told them during a tense phone call. "I know you think I've lost my mind, but for the first time in months, I have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Don't take that away from me." Moving Vesper to the back pasture was a delicate operation. The mare had barely left her stall in over a year, and the journey across the property, less than half a mile, felt monumental. Winifred walked beside her the entire way, murmuring soft reassurances, while Dolores led from the front with a loose lead rope. When they reached the pasture gate, Vesper balked. Her eyes went wide, and she planted her hooves, refusing to move forward. "It's okay," Winifred said, stepping in front of her and placing a hand on her neck. "I know it's scary. New places are always scary, but I promise you I'm not going anywhere. You and me, we're in this together now." Vesper's ears flicked forward and slowly, cautiously, she took a step. Then another. And then, as if something inside her finally released, she walked through the gate and into the pasture. Winifred closed the gate behind them and unclipped the lead rope. For a moment, Vesper stood frozen, overwhelmed by the openness, the grass, the sky. Then she lowered her head and took a tentative bite of grass, and then another. Winifred sank onto the ground, her back against the fence, and watched as Vesper began to graze. Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief, of exhaustion, of something that felt dangerously close to hope. "We did it, Leonard," she whispered to the sky. "We actually did it." The first few weeks in the pasture were an adjustment for both of them. Winifred came every morning and evening to feed Vesper, check her water, and simply be present. She'd started keeping a small folding chair by the fence, and she'd sit there for hours, sometimes reading aloud from the novels Leonard had loved, sometimes just talking about her day. Vesper seemed to thrive on the routine. She'd whinny when she heard Winifred's car on the gravel drive, and she'd trot to the fence to greet her. The mare's personality began to emerge, playful, curious, surprisingly gentle. She'd nuzzle Winifred's pockets for treats, or rest her head on Winifred's shoulder while being groomed, or follow her around the pasture like an oversized, affectionate dog. But there were still hard days. Days when Vesper would stand at the far corner of the pasture, staring at nothing, lost in whatever shadows haunted her. Days when Winifred's own grief would surge up unexpectedly, leaving her breathless and aching. On those days, they'd simply exist together, two broken creatures learning to carry their pain without being crushed by it. One cold November morning, Winifred arrived to find Vesper lying down in the grass, something horses rarely did unless they were sick or dying. Panic shot through her. "Vesper," she called, scrambling over the fence with an agility that surprised her. But as she approached, she realized the mare wasn't sick. She was simply resting, her eyes half closed, her breathing deep and even. When Winifred knelt beside her, Vesper lifted her head and rested it in Winifred's lap, a gesture of trust so profound it took Winifred's breath away. "Oh, sweetheart," Winifred whispered, stroking the mare's face. "You're safe. You're finally safe." They stayed like that for over an hour, woman and horse, finding comfort in each other's presence. And when Vesper finally stood, shaking the grass from her coat, Winifred stood too, and realized she felt lighter than she had in months. Around this time, Fletcher, the journalist, published his article about Winifred and Vesper. He titled it, "The Voice That Saved a Life," and it ran in the local paper with a photo of Winifred standing beside Vesper in the pasture, both of them bathed in golden afternoon light. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from people who'd experienced loss, who understood the lifeline that animals could provide, who saw their own struggles reflected in Winifred's story. A retired veterinarian named Constance offered free health checkups for Vesper. A feed store in the next town over donated 3 months' worth of grain and supplements. A local farrier started coming by weekly, refusing payment simply because he admired what Winifred was doing. But the most unexpected response came from a woman named Lucille, who ran a therapeutic riding program 2 counties over. She called Winifred one evening and made a proposition. "I've been reading about you and Vesper," Lucille said, "and I think she could help people who are struggling with trauma, grief, loss. Horses like her, who've been through hell and come out the other side, have an incredible ability to connect with humans in pain. Would you ever consider bringing her to work with my program?" Winifred's first instinct was to refuse. Vesper was hers. Their bond was sacred, and the thought of sharing that felt like a violation. But then she thought about what Vesper had given her: purpose, connection, a reason to keep going, and she wondered if maybe that gift was meant to be shared. "I'd need to think about it," Winifred said carefully. "Vesper's come a long way, but I don't know if she's ready for that kind of work." "No pressure," Lucille assured her, "but if you ever feel like she is, the door's open." Winifred hung up and walked out to the pasture. Vesper was standing near the fence, watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. "What do you think, girl?" Winifred asked. "Could you handle something like that?" Vesper snorted and tossed her head, and Winifred laughed. The first genuine laugh she'd had in longer than she could remember. Winter arrived with a vengeance. Temperatures plummeted, and snow blanketed the pasture in thick, white silence. Winifred bought heavy blankets for Vesper and installed a heating lamp in the run-in shed. She came twice a day now, breaking ice on the water trough, making sure Vesper had enough hay to keep her warm. The work was exhausting. Winifred's arthritis flared in the cold, and there were mornings she could barely grip the pitchfork, but she persisted. Because this, caring for Vesper, being needed, was what kept her tethered to the world. Then, on a bitter January morning, Disaster struck. Winifred arrived to find the pasture gate hanging open. Her heart lurched. She'd latched it the night before. She was certain of it. But the latch was old and finicky, and the wind had been fierce overnight. "Vesper!" she called, her voice cracking with fear. Silence. She searched the pasture, then the surrounding woods, calling Vesper's name until her throat was raw. Panic clawed at her chest. Vesper didn't know this area. She'd barely been off the property. And with the cold, the ice, the traffic on the main road less than a mile away, Winifred forced herself to think. She called Dolores, who immediately organized a search party. Within an hour, a dozen people were combing the woods and fields around Hollow Creek, calling for Vesper, looking for hoofprints in the snow. Winifred searched too, ignoring the cold that bit through her coat, ignoring the pain in her knees. All she could think about was Vesper, alone and terrified, lost in a landscape that must feel impossibly vast and hostile. "Please," she prayed to whoever might be listening, "please don't take her from me too." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. The search party grew discouraged. Someone suggested they call animal control, that maybe Vesper had been hit by a car, that maybe— "No!" Winifred said fiercely. "She's alive! I know she is!" She didn't know how she knew. She just did. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Winifred found herself standing at the edge of a frozen creek, about a mile from the pasture. She was exhausted, her feet numb, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But something, some instinct she couldn't name, told her to keep going. She followed the creek bed, her boots crunching through the ice-crusted snow, and then she heard it. A soft, desperate whinny. Vesper! She scrambled forward and found the mare standing in a narrow ravine, her right front leg caught in the twisted roots of a fallen tree. Vesper's eyes were wide with fear, her sides heaving. She'd clearly been struggling for hours. "Oh, baby," Winifred whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm here. I'm here." She approached carefully, speaking in the low, soothing voice Vesper had come to trust. "Easy, girl. Let me help you." The roots were thick and stubborn, and Winifred's frozen fingers struggled to find purchase. But she worked methodically, talking the entire time, keeping Vesper calm even as her own heart raced with fear. "We're going to get through this," Winifred said. "You and me, just like we've gotten through everything else." It took 20 agonizing minutes, but finally she worked Vesper's leg free. The mare stumbled forward, nearly knocking Winifred over, and for a moment they simply stood there, leaning against each other, both shaking with cold and relief. Winifred pulled out her phone and called Dolores. "I found her. We're about a mile east of the creek. I'm going to walk her back slowly." The journey home was long and painful. Vesper was limping, and Winifred could barely feel her feet, but they moved together step by step through the darkening woods. And when they finally emerged into the clearing where the search party was waiting, a cheer went up. Dolores ran forward, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God. Thank God." Constance, the retired vet, examined Vesper on the spot. "Nothing broken," she announced. "Just some bruising and strain. She'll need rest, but she'll be fine." Winifred collapsed onto the ground, utterly spent. Someone draped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else pressed a thermos of hot coffee into her hands. But all Winifred could do was stare at Vesper, at this miraculous creature who'd fought so hard to survive. And she realized something. Vesper wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, truly living, and so was Winifred. The incident with the gate became a turning point. Winifred upgraded all the latches, double-checked everything obsessively, and started spending even more time at the pasture. But something had shifted inside her. The fear of losing Vesper had clarified something essential. This wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about building a life worth living. In February, Winifred called Lucille, the woman who ran the therapeutic riding program. "I've been thinking about your offer," Winifred said, "and I think Vesper might be ready. But I have conditions." "Name them," Lucille said. "I stay with her, always. She only works when I'm there and only with clients who understand her history. And if she ever shows signs of stress or trauma, we stop immediately." "Deal," Lucille said without hesitation. 2 weeks later, Winifred trailered Vesper to Lucille's facility for the first time. She was terrified, afraid Vesper would panic, afraid the change would undo all their progress. But when they arrived, Vesper stepped off the trailer calmly, her ears pricked with curiosity. The first client Vesper worked with was a teenage girl named Hazel who'd lost her mother to cancer. Hazel was quiet, withdrawn, her grief a palpable weight. Lucille introduced her to Vesper, explaining the mayor's story, and Hazel's eyes filled with tears. "She understands," Hazel whispered. Winifred watched as Hazel approached Vesper, moving slowly, respectfully. And when Vesper lowered her head and allowed Hazel to rest her forehead against the mare's neck, Winifred felt something break open inside her chest. Not the sharp crack of new grief, but the gentle opening of old wounds, beginning to heal. Over the following months, Vesper worked with a dozen clients, people recovering from trauma, children with anxiety, veterans struggling with PTSD. And every single time, Winifred was there, her voice the constant that grounded Vesper, the reminder that she was safe, that she was loved, that she could trust again. But the most profound moment came in late spring when Winifred brought Pauline and Greta to meet Vesper. Her daughters had remained skeptical of the whole arrangement, worried their mother was overextending herself, clinging to something unsustainable. But when they saw Winifred in the pasture with Vesper, saw the light in their mother's eyes, the purpose in her movements, the peace in her expression, they understood. "She saved you, didn't she?" Greta said softly, watching as Vesper nuzzled Winifred's shoulder. Winifred smiled. "We saved each other." 2 years after Winifred first walked into Hollow Creek stables, she stood in that same pasture on a warm June morning, watching Vesper graze in the golden sunlight. The mare was healthy now, her coat gleaming, her eyes bright, her spirit restored. She still had her moments, days when the old shadows crept back in, but they were fewer and farther between. And Winifred had her moments too. Days when Leonard's absence hit her like a physical blow, when the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole. But she'd learned to sit with those feelings, to let them pass through her without drowning in them. Because she'd learned something from Vesper, grief didn't have to be the end of the story. Dolores had sold the main property, but true to their agreement, Winifred still leased the back pasture. The developer had no interest in that rough, tucked-away piece of land, and Winifred suspected she'd be able to keep it for years to come. She'd even started talking about buying it outright, saving up slowly, dreaming of a future where this place would be permanently hers. She'd also become a regular presence at Lucille's therapeutic riding program. Vesper worked there twice a week now, and Winifred had discovered she had a gift for working with grieving clients, a deep well of empathy forged in her own suffering. She'd helped dozens of people begin their healing journeys, and each one taught her something new about resilience, about the myriad ways humans and animals could save each other. Her daughters visited more often now, bringing their own children to meet Grandma's magic horse. Winifred taught her grandchildren how to brush Vesper, how to speak softly, how to approach with respect and patience. And she saw in their wide, wondering eyes the same awe she'd felt when she'd first realized this broken mare could be made whole again. One evening, as the sun set over the pasture, Winifred sat in her chair by the fence, a book open in her lap. Vesper wandered over and rested her head on Winifred's shoulder, a gesture that had become their ritual. "You know what I realized today?" Winifred said softly, stroking the mare's cheek. "I'm happy. For the first time since Leonard died, I can say that without feeling guilty. I miss him. God, I miss him every day, but I'm happy." Vesper breathed out slowly, a sound of perfect contentment. "Thank you," Winifred whispered, "for trusting my voice, for giving me a reason to use it again." She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, hollow, defeated, barely existing, and she thought about the woman she was now, scarred, yes, but whole, purposeful, alive. She'd come to Hollow Creek thinking she might help a dying horse survive a few more weeks. She'd never imagined she'd find her own salvation in the process. But that's the thing about grace, Winifred had learned. It arrives in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes it's a coal black mare with grief in her eyes and a desperate need to be understood. Sometimes it's the sound of your own voice, spoken into the darkness, finding an answer you didn't know you were seeking. Sometimes it's the slow, painful, beautiful work of learning to live again. Winifred Ashford is 74 now. Vesper is 13. They still spend every morning together in that back pasture at Hollow Creek, still speak to each other in a language deeper than words. Winifred never remarried, never moved away from the house she and Leonard built, but she filled her life with new purpose: the therapeutic riding program, her grandchildren, the quiet joy of watching Vesper help others heal. People sometimes ask her if she ever regrets taking on such a huge responsibility at her age, if she ever wishes she'd chosen an easier path. She always smiles when they ask, because the truth is, Vesper wasn't a burden. She was a lifeline, a reminder that broken things can mend, that trust can be rebuilt, that love, even after devastating loss, can find new forms. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the world is still, and Vesper rests her head on Winifred's shoulder, Winifred swears she can feel Leonard's presence, not in the aching absence she'd carried for so long, but in the gentle fullness of a life lived with purpose and grace. "I hope you're proud of me," she whispers to the sky. "I hope you know I'm okay now." And in the warmth of the sun on her face and the solid, breathing presence of the mare beside her, she finds her answer. She's more than okay. She's exactly where she needs to be. If this story touched you, if you believe in second chances and the healing power of connection, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about the extraordinary ways we save each other. And drop a comment telling me what's given you a reason to keep going in your darkest times. I read every single one. And don't forget, tell me what city you're watching from. Let's build a global community of people who believe in hope. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.